you notice that you seem to always be hungry, or you notice that it's hard to pick up the signs of feeling full and or satiated. And there's a really, really big difference between the two, because these two hormones, either the hunger hormone or the satiety hormone, when they are out of balance, we sometimes feel like we are excessively hungry even though we just ate, or we could feel like no matter how much we eat, we just never get full. The difference between these two statements, always feeling hungry versus always feeling like you're never satiated. And this is a very, very small difference to dissociate. However, when we're able to do that, we're going to be able to pick up ways that we can regulate these hormones. Welcome back, friends. I'm your host, Sherry Shaban, and with each episode, I am honored to be your coach and guide in the journey to make peace with food, fall in love with fitness, and ultimately yourself. My intention in each episode is to help you release the old story of who you are and step into the one you're always meant to be. We'll challenge conventional diet and fitness culture and understand the importance of tuning out all the shoulds they tell us to do and tuning into our own inner wisdom instead. What you focus on, you create more of. Through these conversations, you'll shift your focus from what you're supposed to be doing to who you want to be, so that health and fitness and ease around food is not just what you do, but who you are. And if you find that this conversation resonates with you today, then I want to invite you to join our free Make Peace with Food Facebook community at myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com, where you can connect with me and my team directly and access all the free trainings and resources we have for you so you can regulate your nervous system and make peace with food. And then also remember to share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear this today. The links are in the show notes. If you're listening to today's episode and you feel like food and dieting and weight and body image has completely taken over your life, has complete power over you, I hope this conversation brings you the comfort and inspiration that you're searching for. And remember, you're not alone. Healing is possible. If you've ever felt like you know exactly what to do, but you just can't bring yourself to do the things that you know to do, then I want to invite you to join me during my 3-day Break the Cycle Masterclass, where I'm going to be talking about how to overcome binge eating and emotional eating and how to regulate your nervous system so that you're no longer engaging in these unwanted eating behaviors. And this isn't a 3-day masterclass on weight loss, by the way. This is a 3-day masterclass on understanding how to break free from the cycle that's resulting in the side effect of weight gain. And that's the big difference, because you know this by now, that repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is called insanity. You know that dieting doesn't work. You know that it's not about hard discipline and getting yourself to be on another plan or hiring a nutritionist to tell you what to eat. You know all the things. Heck, I bet you can even write a book on all the things. But what you do want to uncover is, why is it that you continue to sabotage? Why does it feel like you're always on the wagon or off the wagon? And that's exactly why I'd love for you to join me during this 3-day Break the Cycle Masterclass that I'm giving completely free. Now you can register at sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. Again, sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. Again, it's completely free to join. And the goal during these 3 days together is to uncover why it is that you continue to engage in unwanted eating behaviors, even though you know exactly what to do. sherryshaban.com/break the cycle. All right, now let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about the hunger hormone, and we're going to talk about the satiety hormone. And we are going to, most importantly, put this in an actionable way so that we can start to rebalance these hormones. If you notice that you seem to always be hungry, or you notice that it's hard to pick up the signs of feeling full and or satiated. And there's a really, really big difference between the two, because these two hormones, either the hunger hormone or the satiety hormone, When they are out of balance, we sometimes feel like we are excessively hungry, even though we just ate, or we could feel like no matter how much we eat, we just never get full. And what I would like for you to do today is tune into the difference between these two statements. Always feeling hungry versus always feeling like you're never satiated. Okay. And this is a very, very small difference to dissociate. However, when we're able to do that, we're going to be able to pick up ways that we can regulate these hormones. It's actually going to be a short and sweet discussion today because what I feel like we want to focus more on is going to be, all right, now that I know this information, what can I do with it? Because all of the information that I'm sharing with you is logical and it is insightful and it is intellectual. And the intellectual mind, which is the conscious mind, can make decisions with it and can put it in a structure that makes sense for us. And we can do something with that information so that we can take actionable steps. And if I'm being quite honest, you don't need anyone to help you do that. But it's the other part of the brain. It's the unconscious mind, your subconscious mind, that actually governs all your behaviors. And what we're going to talk about today is that moment where suddenly the conscious mind gets turned off, and then the unconscious mind, which only has one job, which is to run patterns that it's learned, starts to take over. And it just starts to run the pattern. And I call this pattern the loop. I call this pattern the record, especially when it comes to any thoughts that are negative or condescending or judgmental or even deprecating. Once we start to run that loop and the unconscious mind takes over, then all of a sudden, the behavior that we know that we don't want to do, that we don't engage in because we know it doesn't serve us, starts to take over. And so that's why reading the books and watching videos that can offer you information that's pertinent, that's relevant, and that's useful is also really great. Podcasts are really great. And that's why I have the podcast, Make Peace with Food. All of that is really great. However, this is all information that you're gathering in your conscious mind, in your intellectual mind, which works really well when you can rationalize and you can apply logic and you can apply reason, and there are no triggers, emotional or otherwise, that are interfering with these decisions that you're making in the moment. However, the reason why we resist change is not because of the information that we know, it's because of the information that we don't know, which is exactly what's rooted in the unconscious mind. It is the patterns that we are living day in, day out, that we have habituated over time due to various reasons. Some of them could be traumas we've had in the past. Some of them could be experiences that we've had in the past. Many of the people that I work with in the Make Peace with Food program come to me as like the last resort. It is the last resort program. And I'll tell you, and I'll be completely honest, it's really hard for people to say yes to Make Peace with Food. It's really hard for people to say yes to this program for two main things. Number one, because I explain that this is not a weight loss program. I am not here to help you release weight, but what I am here to help you do is uncover the unconscious behaviors that are leading you to emotionally eat, to overeat, to hedonic eating, to mindless eating, and to other self-sabotaging behavior. And as a result of that, the side effect, of course, will be weight release. And it's going to happen gradually over time in a way that most importantly is sustainable to you. So that's the number one reason why people resist, is because, of course, even anybody who is struggling with unwanted eating behavior and it's completely taking over their world, what they actually really want is to feel free and comfortable in their body, to get their body back, to recognize themselves back, and to feel completely centered and completely in control around food and other behaviors that they know they don't want to do. So that's the number one reason. The second reason why people resist the Make Peace with Food program or resist to join is because they've already done all the other programs. They've been at this weight loss journey practically for their entire life. A lot of them really even starting when they are kids and struggling with weight since adolescence. So imagine an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old being put on a diet either through the help of a doctor or because a parent was trying to be helpful. They've been dieting their whole entire lives. All they've ever known is my life is a struggle with weight. Weight is a really hard thing for me. And they've invested in countless programs, countless programs. They've invested in people and trusted in them. And the result was always the same. And so that's the second reason. That's a second big challenge to overcome. And why I'm talking to you about this today is because if you recognize yourself in either of these options, then it's so important to know that there is another way that you haven't tried at all. And the intellectual mind needs to know that this is a completely different approach, because otherwise it's going to bring you back to the exact same experiences that you've had in the past. When we've had experience after experience after experience of failed weight loss journeys or lots of disappointment, or we even had those short-term results that we were excited about for a short period of time, before we knew it, all of a sudden we gained that weight back and sometimes more. And that has been the experience we've had with weight loss. Then, of course, then we're always going to think that the next experience is going to be exactly the same. And so, what I ask you to do as you're listening to this conversation is, how can this be different for you? How is this approach different for you? Not for me. How is this different for you? Because I want to empower you through our discussion around hormones and nervous system, that this is a different way, that all the other methods that you've tried in the past were focusing on the side effect of the problem. They were focusing on the weight gain. It was focusing on the food, but not focusing on the behavior, which is driven by your nervous system and by your dysregulated hormones. And so if you repeat the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, we call that insanity. And that's why I make it so clear that if you're looking for a weight loss coach, I am not your match. That's not my ambition for you. My ambition for you is to be able to handle the ups and downs of life without it needing to result in a coping mechanism, whether that's an exciting thing that's happening or whether that's a very difficult situation that you're going through. Because imagine that you have that fortitude, that you're able to withstand anything around you, that the people who used to trigger you no longer trigger you, or the situations in which you used to be triggered in are no longer triggering. Imagine what would happen as a side effect of your choices around food. If you're no longer feeling like you need to cope with cookies and ice cream, or you need to reward yourself with treats after a great workout session or a great week of eating, if you no longer have that behavior, what do you think will happen as a side effect of just not overeating and not giving yourself those foods that are very stressful for the physical body, that result, of course, in storage of excess energy? And what would happen if you're able to regulate your cortisol? And cortisol is that master hormone. Cortisol is the hormone that controls and drives them all. When cortisol is high, you're going to have sugar cravings because cortisol wants to always have sugar in the bloodstream. And when there's sugar in the bloodstream, insulin is going to be released because insulin's job is to take care of that sugar in the bloodstream. And insulin is the storage hormone. Anytime there's insulin in the bloodstream, its job is to store and to tell everything that's in storage, including everything that's in our fat cells, we're all good. We don't need anything to come out of storage. In fact, we need to store more. And the more that there's cortisol in the bloodstream, the more that we aren't regulating our nervous system, we're not bringing ourselves back into safety mode, and cortisol remains high, the more that we're continuing to drive insulin. And the result is we're going to see an effect on our hunger hormones and on our satiety hormones, which we're going to be talking about today, ghrelin and leptin. We're going to be talking about ghrelin and leptin today. So you see, if we focus all of our attention, which I bet, because I hear this 100% of the time, and I don't like to say that I love to say I told you so, but I do love to say I told you so. I hear this 100% of the time. Anytime I work with somebody who has gone through the diet after diet after diet, and by the way, many times these are people in the health and fitness space. And I shared with you my story that I am obsessed with information and I'm obsessed with education and studies and the science. And I got in this trap. And what I love to say is, see, if you just had focused on the actual root of the problem, you would have resolved it. But that's not diet culture's job. Diet culture, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, is constantly pushing products on us, solutions on us that seem to be magical and overnight. And we've been led to believe that it should be rapid. And the problem is our motivation. The problem is our discipline and us not adhering to this meal plan well enough, or us not being strict enough, or us not being in ketosis enough, or maybe our carbs are too high, or we're not eating enough protein. That's what we think is the problem. But the actual problem is that we have never addressed the nervous system, which really means we've never addressed cortisol. Because addressing the nervous system means being able to get into protection mode when it's the right time to get into protection mode, and then quickly coming back into safety mode when we are now in that place where we've overcome whatever situation that caused us to be in protection mode. So it has to be a temporary thing. And when we're not taught this, because we're not taught that in school, just the way we're not taught how to manage our finances in school, or even how to have a healthy sexual relationship in school. There's a lot of things that are not taught to us in our education system, and this is one of them. We're never taught how to regulate our own emotions. We're never taught how to release triggers. And of course, if we were never allowed to fully experience them, and we never learned this from childhood, that's how these patterns persist. And this is how the unconscious mind starts to store this information and starts to make decisions, starts to make conclusions about certain things, and starts to create belief systems. And so the word nutrition or the word diet starts to trigger this feeling of resistance, because all we've ever known about nutrition and diet is starvation. It's so hard and challenging. It means I got to drink liquid things and eat a lot of cabbage, or maybe I have to exercise a lot. And it's always this reminder that whatever I'm doing is wrong. And I'm just not trying hard enough. And it's my fault. And so that's why it's so important to know that you're here to get information into the conscious mind. And I'll tell you that if that's all that you have committed to, then it's also going to prevent you from exploring deeper and really being able to pull up what's actually blocking you. Because what's blocking you is in your unconscious mind. That's all your beliefs. That's all your past experiences. Those are your traumas. Those are your dysregulated emotions. And that's also where all of the coping mechanisms are living. And so that's why bridging the gap between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, which is exactly what we do in the Make Peace with Food program, is the way out. And I will be completely honest with you. I have had to do this work on myself too. And so I know that it's actually a very simple solution, but it's a very big challenge. It's difficult. And what makes it difficult is giving yourself full permission to get into those places sometimes that we've been avoiding to get into for many, many years. And what's also difficult is allowing yourself to have grace and compassion and kindness. And it's this common theme that I see with the people that I work with, that they're very, very hard on themselves, that they have a lot of negative self-talk. Even if they look like they're crushing it in many areas of their life, they are still in this constant cloud of negative self-talk. And that negative self-talk, which is coming from the unconscious mind, is actually what's driving their behavior. When we aren't in full truth and trust in ourselves, then this is also where we stop to stay consistent with some of the things that we may not even be realizing are serving us. And so that's why I share with you, instead of looking at the calories, instead of following the meal plan, instead of using the scale, which are all external guides, the only guide I want you to follow is yourself. It's your body. When you tune into that guide, you're always going to be making the decisions that are going to serve you the most. But if the scale says, oh, it went up a couple pounds, and that's why you stopped doing the things, you're not listening to your inner wisdom. You're listening to the scale, which, by the way, fluctuates when it's humid outside, which fluctuates if you didn't take a good poop that morning, which fluctuates if you're retaining water or you have inflammation. All of that is a natural thing that you would see on the scale. And the scale also may not even shift if you are putting on lean body mass and reducing body fat. And it actually could be working. And so if you give yourself that place of full surrender, which is, I clearly don't know something that is governing all this. There's something that I'm missing here. And it's not about what I know about carbs and proteins and fats. And it's not what I know about calories. And it's not what I know about how to structure a meal plan. Clearly, there's something more to it. It's not just about the calorie deficit. What is it that's actually driving my behavior? And we talked about this when we spoke about cortisol. You could be doing all of the right things. You could be exercising appropriately according to all recommendations out there. You could be lifting weights. You could be eating in a calorie deficit, and yet there's absolutely no progress. Or worse, you're actually noticing that you're putting on weight over time, even though you are putting in the effort. Then clearly there's something missing. And that missing link is addressing hormones, and more specifically, addressing cortisol level, which really means addressing nervous system, because it's always going to favor fat storage. When cortisol is high, it's going to favor fat storage. And not just because it's going to get you to have more sugar cravings, but it's also going to interrupt the actual thyroid function, the natural thyroid function. It's going to slow down metabolism. And it's going to start to interfere with the hunger and the satiety hormone, which again, we're going to talk about today. And the hunger hormone is ghrelin, and the satiety hormone is leptin. When cortisol is high, it's interfering with all these things. When cortisol is high, it's interfering with restful sleep rather. When cortisol is high, it's interfering with your sleep. And if your sleep is interrupted and it's not restful, it's going to drive high ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone the next day. There's a very big difference between I always feel hungry versus I never feel full. I never feel satiated. Okay? Those are two different hormones. So let's talk about those hormones. And remember, these hormones are affected by cortisol, and they're also affected by lack of sleep. So when you're really tired, these hormones are affected. And of course, when your cortisol is high, it's likely going to affect your sleep. So sleep can be affected because of other factors, such as the room is too hot or the room is too cold, or you drank so much water right before bed and then you're constantly getting up to pee all the time, or maybe you've got a young baby, or maybe you've got a sick child and there are other reasons that are keeping you up, or there's construction going on outside, or a lot of noise. So those are reasons that could wake you up during your sleep that are external, that are out of your control most of the time. But the things that are actually in your control is also affecting your sleep, and that is your cortisol levels. That's your stress hormone. That's you having a dysregulated nervous system that is locked into protection mode because cortisol also disrupts your sleep. And cortisol disrupts your sleep when you are in a high stress situation, when you have a lot of things going on, when you've got a lot of things on your mind, when it's a very difficult life event. But cortisol could also disrupt your sleep when you've eaten something right before bed that gave you a sugar spike. That's another way that cortisol is released at night and can disrupt your sleep. So that's why, again, we have to look at whole person versus just looking at a very small piece of the puzzle and just that one hormone. We have to look at what else is going on in this person's life and what else do we need to address, especially when it comes to improving sleep quality. And so our two hunger hormones, our two hunger and satiety hormones that basically regulate when we're going to eat, when we're going to stop eating, that can be disrupted through sleep and cortisol, are ghrelin and leptin. And ghrelin is the hunger hormone. Ghrelin is released from the stomach, and it's released from the stomach when the stomach is empty and it's been empty for a while. More ghrelin is released, the greater your hunger is. And obviously, less ghrelin is released, the less intense your hunger is. And then leptin is the satiety hormone. And this hormone is released from your fat cells when you are full. When you are full, when you are satiated, leptin is released from your fat cells. And so imagine that whole picture we painted with cortisol, okay? Cortisol is high. And we've got sugar cravings because it's affecting ghrelin. It's saying, hey, ghrelin, start releasing and start giving those signals that we are hungry, even though we may have just eaten, or even though we don't actually have true body hunger. Our body isn't actually demanding nourishment or energy in the moment. So when cortisol is high, it's going to trigger ghrelin to have more of those signals, to give off more of those signals that you're hungry. And of course, you're going to end up eating. And then imagine now we are giving into ghrelin, and now insulin is high because, of course, the foods that we are craving are going to be the refined carbohydrates. They're going to be the easy access foods that are going to give us instant energy. And these are generally fast foods. These are sweets, these are treats, these are chips. There's anything that processed foods, anything with easy access energy, your refined carbohydrates. And so insulin is up, and the pancreas keeps trying to keep up with that insulin demand. And because the cortisol continues to drive, eat more, eat more, eat more. And insulin's job is to store, store, store. So now we have more fat cells, and fat cells get actually replicated once one fully expands and can't store anymore, then it replicates into another fat cell. So now we have more fat cells, and leptin signals are trying to come off of those fat cells. The more fat cells we have, the more leptin is released. And now we continue to do this over time. And we spoke about insulin resistance happening when we are constantly demanding the pancreas to release insulin to keep up with the sugar demands. Well, something similar happens with leptin resistance. The more those fat cells are giving off leptin, and the signal is not being heard. There's just so much leptin, and the signal is not being received because ghrelin keeps driving the need to eat, and the need to eat something that's going to give you instant access now, that's going to require more insulin release. And that insulin release is going to bring more into storage. And when the muscles are full of glycogen and the liver is full of glycogen, now we're going to start storing as fat, both in the liver and in the body, and especially viscerally too, around the organs. And so those fat cells are trying to get us to stop eating, saying, hey, we're satiated, hey, we're full. And we override them by eating. And then now we're stuck in the cycle. So do you see the pattern? Do you see what's happening? Do you see the cycle that's happening? And I don't know about you, but I can only speak for myself. I mean, I remember this one moment. This was in 2019. My mom had just passed away, and I had decided to be vegan that year. I actually started to be vegan that year at the beginning of the year because my mom's like last few days where she was palliative, she wasn't able to digest meat. She just physically wasn't able to digest meat. And so whenever she would eat meat, she'd feel very ill. And meat is one of those types of foods that requires a lot of energy and a lot of enzymes to break down. And she wasn't able to do that at that point. And so she was only leaning towards very light food, vegetarian food. And at first, my whole family was trying to encourage her to eat meat because she's anemic and she needs more protein and all these things. But what I decided to do was to support her. And I was like, okay, mom, you know what? You're going to go plant-based. I'm going to go plant-based. Let's go. By the way, at that time, everybody was talking about plant-based. It was such a big buzz and it just felt like cool. Like, that's what everyone's saying you should be eating anyways. We shouldn't be eating meat. So you know what? I'm going to support her. And so I was eating plant-based. And that really meant that overnight I had completely changed how I eat, like completely, like a 180-degree overnight, going from a paleo diet to 100% plant-based, going from not having eaten grains and legumes in years to suddenly overnight bringing them back with a vengeance. And so I brought in legumes, I brought in grains, and I completely changed my nutrition. And then during that time, my mom was getting iller and iller until eventually she passed away in June. And I remember it was August. So this was a few months after my mom had passed away. And I was having one of my binge episodes. And my binge episode was in response to being really, really strict during the week. And because I was eating plant-based, I wasn't actually consuming enough nourishment. My calories were so low. I mean, there's only so much calories that you could get from salads and from vegetables. And so I wasn't actually meeting the demands of my body. And because my body was physically starving and my cortisol was high because I hadn't really managed the loss of my mother properly, I hadn't actually fully grieved and mourned and done all the things that you're supposed to do during that time. I kind of just swept it under the rug and kept going because I had to be strong and I had all these things to take care of. So can you imagine my cortisol's through the roof because I just had a major life event that I did not address properly emotionally. And then on top of that, I was completely changing my diet, my nourishment. So my body was like really stressed about what I was eating, trying to digest the foods that I wasn't eating for years and trying to keep up with that. And I was exercising so much. That's actually how I tried to deal with my mother's passing. I was trying to over-exercise just to get my mind off of it. And I remember sitting down one time and having my third bowl of oats. And this was like a massive bowl. I had my third bowl of oats and it was full of fruit and all kinds of nuts and all kinds of things. And literally feeling like, oh my God, my stomach is going to explode. Like I was so full, but I couldn't stop eating. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I think I'm going to die from an explosion of like my stomach. Like, does that happen? Can that happen? Can a stomach explode? And can death happen in that way? And I had to go look it up. And this is real. And this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say when all of your hormones are off balance. So my leptin is like, we're full, we're satiated, we're full, we're satiated, but cortisol is high and insulin is high because I'm eating oats and fruit and I could not stop eating. And so ghrelin is also high at that same time. And ghrelin and leptin need to work oppositely. When ghrelin is high, leptin is low. When leptin is high, ghrelin is low. But when you are dysregulated, your ghrelin is always high and your leptin is always high, but your brain can't pick up the signal. And so you start to develop leptin resistance rather. And so I've gone through that and I know exactly what that feels like to be completely full and yet you still can't stop eating. And that's what we experience when we are emotionally eating and when we are binge eating, and especially if we are very, very strict with dieting. Because being very, very strict with dieting it increases your stress level, so increases cortisol, but also increases your hunger. If you are literally starving yourself, and if you are in a calorie deficit for too long, you are going to have ghrelin levels that are extremely high, and that's going to drive a binge. That's going to feel like constant cravings, especially for foods that can give immediate energy, which we just spoke about, which are the refined foods, which are the easy to grab the glucose from foods. And those are the foods that tend to be the processed foods and the foods that we know don't serve us. And so that's why when we can stop looking at calories in, calories out, and we can start focusing on how can I regulate my nervous system and how can I regulate my hormones, everything starts to change. Because I've spoken to you about cortisol, which causes cravings. I've spoken to you about insulin, which also drives your cravings every single time there's an insulin spike. So you eat something, insulin rises to match the glucose in the bloodstream, and then the moment it drops, that becomes a craving. And then I also spoke to you about how ghrelin, when it's out of control or out of regulation, also drives your cravings. So the goal here is not more dieting and more restriction. That is not the solution. All you're doing is you're trying to fix the side effects. You're trying to fix the symptoms, but you're not actually fixing the cause. And biology will always win. And that's why you'll always feel like you're defeated. You'll always feel like no matter what you do and no matter how much effort you actually put in, no matter how much you try, it's not working. And I'm going to tell you that it's not you. It's not your fault. It's not your motivation. It's not your drive. It has nothing to do with any of these things, but has everything to do with your biology. You're wired for those cravings. You've wired yourself for those cravings through many different ways. We're looking at what's going on in your whole life. And that's why looking at past traumas could be relevant for certain people. And looking at experiences through dieting is relevant with certain people. Looking at where your scarcity mindset is at. Are you leading life with a scarcity mindset? Do you always feel like people are out to get you, that there aren't enough resources, that no matter how hard you try, it's just never good enough? If you have a not enoughness mindset, as we call it, that's going to drive your behavior. And so that's why I say this is not the approach that you have ever done before. It's a completely different approach. And I will also be the first to say, please don't pay anybody to give you a diet plan and to tell you how much to exercise. Right now, with the amount of resources that we have online, you can look that up. Nobody needs to tell you how many calories you need to get in or what the best macros are, and that you should have to pay them for that information because it's available. And there are many tools that will give you that feedback for free or for a very, very, very small monthly fee. That is not the solution, though. And I think you already know that. That's not the solution. The solution is how can I balance my hormones? How can I regulate my nervous system? Because if I can do that, then I'm not overeating. I'm not mindlessly eating. I'm not eating when I'm not hungry. I know when to stop and I feel completely okay. And my mind is not constantly focused on food and obsessing about food and thinking about food all the time. But when we're dieting, when our main objective is weight loss, when we feel like we have a physical defect in our body because we are a certain size, and maybe we've even been told that we're supposed to release weight by our doctors or other medical professionals, then that's where the issues really begin, because now we're always thinking about weight loss. We're always thinking about what's wrong with us. We're always upset at ourselves when we've eaten something that we weren't supposed to eat. And there's this constant feeling of guilt around food and this constant need to restrict. And if we are successful in being in a calorie deficit for more than a few days, that's when the metabolism starts to slow down. That's when cortisol starts to kick in. That's when the body actually starts to feel like there's something wrong. Did you hear that? 3 days. It takes 3 days. If you're in a calorie deficit for 3 days, after 72 hours, your metabolism will begin to slow down. Your body will start that stress response because it feels like we are heading for starvation. So while your app may tell you, hey, cool, keep up that 500 calorie deficit, and by July 14th, you should have released X number of pounds, actually, that's just a mathematical calculation. And I don't know if you've noticed, but you are not a mathematical calculation. You are a living being that's got emotions and that's got thoughts and that's got behaviors. And that is influenced and triggered by things in your environment. And that never is brought up in that app. And so that's why a lot of people will be in that calorie deficit. And after 72 hours, your body adapts. And when it does start to drop the weight, guess what weight is dropping? It's your lean body mass. It's not your fat tissue, because fat tissue is the most precious. And if you are in a starvation mode, the first tissue that your body's going to start to use is your muscle tissue, because that can be very easily converted into sugar, into glucose, and it can start to get used for different things. And fat is more precious. And so the body will call upon that last. And so how do we do that? So then how, Sherry, then how can I drop body fat if you're telling me that that's the most precious muscle tissue? Well, you can do that when you make your body feel safe. If your body feels safe, there's no threat, and I'm doing things in a way that feels safe, and I'm nourishing my body, I'm giving my body all the things that it needs. I'm resting when it's time to rest. I'm not exercising and killing myself with exercise every single day, because more is not more. And when I'm honoring my cortisol levels, my body will feel safe. And when your body feels safe, that's when it releases. It's not your calorie deficit that gets it to release body fat. It's your body feeling safe that releases body fat. Any calorie deficit, yeah, sure, step on the scale, you're going to see the pounds go down, but most of that is muscle mass. And that's why when people start eating regularly again, the way that they used to eat after the diet is over, they start to see the weight come back. Because when the muscle tissue has atrophied, when it's been used during that starvation period, you no longer have the ability to burn as many calories at rest. This is called your basal metabolic rate. So your basal metabolic rate goes down. That is your body's needs for energy, simply just to live, to just be, to just exist. And that all comes from how much muscle tissue you have. And so this is oftentimes, again, what we see when people start to change their diet or start to go on another diet, that it is effective for a short period of time, and then it's no longer effective. Or that same thing that you used to do that used to be effective is no longer effective. Just a reminder, there is no gain and there is no growth and there is no change when you have a judgmental stance. If you're hearing any of this today and you're judging yourself, there's no growth from that place. But if you're hearing this today and you decide to take inspired action, which is, you know what would happen if I did try this approach? What would happen if I had full trust in my body? Because I haven't had trust in my body in the past. I haven't trusted my body at all. It's been years, if not decades, that I haven't trusted my body. What would happen if I actually started to trust my body and stop trusting the scale and stop trusting certain foods to help me release weight and a calorie deficit? But what would happen if I actually just start to tune into my body, which really means tuning into my nervous system and tuning into my hormones and tuning into that inner wisdom that's already there. And I never take absolutely any credit for anybody's success, because all I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal your blind spot. I'm going to tell you what would work for you, what I see. But then you are the one who's going to apply the action. You're the one who's going to be brave and try something different. And so I hold that space for you. I share with you the guardrails, but it's you, and more importantly, it's actually your inner wisdom that does all the work.